Hey guys, welcome to Comics and Chill. Got a quick video for you today, which I'm recording for the second time in a row. I just recorded 2 videos with the sound completely switched off. I'm a moron. Anyway, let's get stuck into this. So the reason I started the channel, or part of the reason, was to talk about comics that I liked collecting as a kid. I started collecting in 2002, and there's a lot of comics from back then that I have this sort of nostalgic love for, even if they're not very good anymore. And I also get a little obsessive sometimes, so I was going to try and talk about them in the order that I purchased them, which is kind of insane. It's not really important to anyone but me. But what I did find was a Marvel fandom wiki website type thing, which lists all of the Marvel comics released by year and by month. You can see everything. So I went straight in 2002. Then I thought, I'll go back a year, I'll go back another year, because when I started collecting, I did also buy back issues. And I was just looking at all of the covers, all the thumbnails that they had there, seeing what jogged my memory, comics I may have forgotten about. But I actually ended up going back to as far as 1998. And I noticed a few things, I had some thoughts, I just wanted to share them real quick here with you guys. Now, in the early 90s, Marvel was killing it, selling hundreds of thousands of copies, millions of copies in some cases, because they had shit-hot artists like Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, Todd McFarlane, and then Marvel suffered a huge loss when all those guys buggered off to start Image Comics. They wanted to do things their way, which is fair enough. But then Marvel had a big creative gap to fill in a lot of their books, and they definitely struggled for a little while. They did eventually bring back Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee, I think it was 96, 97, to try and rejuvenate sales on, titles like Captain America, Fantastic Four, Iron Man, and the Avengers. But not long after that Heroes Reborn era, Marvel declared bankruptcy. And as I was looking back through all these years, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, the year I started collecting, I went to 2003 and 2004 as well, I had to stop myself because the night was getting on and I could have sat there for hours just going through lists and lists of comics, looking at the thumbnails, making notes of what I want to talk about here in the channel. But as I was going through there, I did notice a few trends, and it was really interesting to me. The Marvel Comics universe at the time, it just kind of did not seem cohesive. It didn't seem like it had direction, or it was very well together, or what it knew. It didn't seem like it knew what it wanted to be. You could see at one point, actually from the late 90s up until the early 2000s, you can see Marvel making attempts to sort of hit that manga audience with the Marvel Mangaverse and the Tsunami line of comics, which I've talked about here before. That never really took off for them in any big way, and it reminded me kind of how DC especially, but I think some other companies too, are trying to get into the book markets right now, and the young adult book market, to try and tap into that audience. But one thing that stood out to me was a few of these things that Marvel were trying, but one thing in particular which did turn out to be quite successful to them, and that was the Marvel Knights line, which was ran by Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti, 2 friends that had been off. I think they'd worked at DC, they'd worked at Marvel a little bit too. They went off to try and do their own thing, outside of Image even, called Event Comics. And one way or another, they were brought into Marvel to kind of do a Heroes Reborn thing again, but with lower tier characters and a darker tone. And this was called the Marvel Knights line. And they kicked off with books like Daredevil, which was written by Kevin Smith, who I've talked about here before, Christopher Priest on Black Panther. They had a Punisher book and a few others which are escaping me right now. I'll do a full video on Marvel Knights some other time. But what's interesting is you see here in the Marvel Knights line, this little corner that Joe Quesada has been given, that he really does start to cultivate talent. And this is talent that will go on to later really help the Marvel Comics universe proper get back on track. And one person is Brian Michael Bendis, who eventually took over writing Daredevil right after Kevin Smith's run. I think there was another writer filling in for a little while, but pretty much soon after Kevin Smith's run, Brian Michael Bendis comes in. Not long after that, he launches Ultimate Spider-Man, I think in 2000, 2001, and he's one of the architects of the Ultimate comic universe. Grant Morrison's on X-Men. Mark Millar joins in on the Ultimate Universe with Ultimates and Ultimate X-Men. And these guys, along with maybe Garth Ennis, who pitched in on the Marvel Max line and some Marvel Knights books. Brian K. Vaughan, who was writing some fan favourite Tsunami titles at the time and a few other small jobs. He would go on to become a powerhouse all of his own later on. But these guys are kind of carrying Marvel along until 2004, when Bendis eventually gets to take over the Avengers. And it's from this point on that the Marvel Comics universe as a whole starts to feel more cohesive, more like it's part of the same world and moving in a good direction. And it goes this way, I'd say, for about 8 years. And that's kind of where I dropped off collecting comics hardcore. I'll talk about the reason why that is some other time. But it was real interesting to be looking at Marvel's output year by year, month by month, just to see what was going on and to not only notice that a lot of the books that I liked back then, maybe I don't like so much now, but I still have that sentimental value for. But it was just nice to sort of notice some of the trends that were going on at the time. And I'll definitely be going through the releases from 2005 onwards. And I just want to be clear that I'm not shitting on these 90s books or early 2000s books or any of the creators that made them. There are a lot of new books that I wasn't aware of that I learned from going through Marvel month by month. Some things that I've picked up on that looked interesting and that I'll want to talk about here in the channel later on. I'd love to hear what you guys think of this era of Marvel. Feel free to comment or get in touch with me and let me know if I'm having any blind spots in this area or what books you loved from this era that I should check out. I'd just love to know your thoughts. Anyway guys, thanks for checking out today's video. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Follow us on social media and have a great day. I'll be back tomorrow.